They're dumbfounded at what goes on here. The corruption drips off the walls in this place. It's crazy.
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers.
I want the truth.
You can't handle the truth.
That's what the left-wing media wants you to think. You can't handle the truth. But I'll always give you the unvarnished truth of the corruption, media bias, and downright lies you are being told by Albany today. I'm New York State Assemblyman David DiPietro. Some say I'm the conscience of Albany because I believe you, the citizens of New York, need to know the truth. Welcome to the Truth in Politics podcast and to this week's show. Welcome, everybody. I love that introduction, but you're always going to get the truth here. When you log on and you start watching this, you will always get the truth in politics in New York State and around the country. That's what I do. I call it out. People that know me and you know that I have one gear, and that's fast forward, telling you the truth, and I could care less what anybody else thinks about it because you need to hear the truth. I'm firmly committed, and I firmly believe that when the average person on the street hears the truth, they can make up their own mind about what's going on. They don't need mealy-mouthed politicians telling them what they think, or the media telling them what they should think, or some teacher or some political activist. So with that, we have got a great show today. And before I get into that, we have got a sponsor, which I want to bring up right away. We've got someone very near and dear to my house right here, Kip's Restaurant in South Wales. Okay. It's at the end of the 400 Expressway, out of Western New York. If you ever have a chance to go there, it's a breakfast only place. It's fantastic. We love them over there. If you want to see motorcycles, conservatism, and Johnny Cash, you're going to be going to Kip's. By the way, and we don't know how, but this conservative little restaurant was voted one of the top 40 restaurants in New York State for politicians. And this is from a total leftist liberal magazine out of New York City. So that was, the fact that he got this honor is really cool. And, but if you see this show and you just listen to what I said and you go to Kip's, you mention you saw it on this podcast, and we will give you a fly swatter, swat out Albany corruption from me. And also right here, split the state mug. That's right. I have the bill in New York State to split New York City off and let it float into the Atlantic. That's my bill, to make 3 autonomous regions so that we no longer have to deal with the leftist communist liberals out of New York City. So with that, folks, on my show today, COVID's back. Or should I put a question mark behind that says COVID's back? Because this is it. The politicians are going crazy. Our country learned a lot in 2020. The so-called experts lied about COVID infection rates. They lied about the number of deaths. 3 years later, the fake news New York Times is admitting that COVID deaths were exaggerated by 30%. Many say it was much, much more than 30%, these deaths, okay? This false information did tremendous damage. Our economy stumbled even more. Our nation weakened. Our children stayed home from school and lost their way. Okay. These lies drove the American people further into despair. And that's what it was. That's where they wanted you. Worried and scared, afraid for your families, afraid to even go outside. They knew your despair would make you ready to accept the destruction of our election system as if it was unsafe to vote in person. Right? Remember that? These lies helped Democrats remake the 2020 election so they could steal it with mail-in ballots. I was there. I know this is what they did. You know it. I know it. Everybody knows it. So when we hear the same liars out there warning us that a new strain of coronavirus is coming just before an election, totally coincidental, we all know what it is. Okay, that's a clear signal. They want to try to rerun their mail-in ballot scheme. We cannot allow this fraud to happen again under the guise of a new and curiously well-timed virus outbreak, another election variant. Of course, be safe, be healthy, and be careful. It's flu season, and one thing we know for sure, a flood of fake mail-in ballots is not the cure, folks. So with that, I want to bring on my guest, uh, Dr. Rodger Hodkinson. Okay, Dr. Hodkinson is the CEO and medical director of MedMal Doctors. He received his general medical degrees from Cambridge University, where he was a scholar at Corpus Christi College. Following a residency at the University of British Columbia, he became a Royal College certified general pathologist and also a fellow of the College of American Pathologists. He has been recognized by the Court of Queen's Bench in Alberta, Canada, as an expert in pathology, president, the Alberta Society of Laboratory Physicians, CEO of Sterat Laboratories, chairman of the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons Examination Committee in General Pathology, that's in Ottawa, and CEO and medical director of an IME company, Western Medical Assessments. There are a lot of alphabet soup behind this gentleman's name, folks. This is one of the leading pathologists, leading doctors in the world. And he does not follow the mainstream. He cannot be bought. This man speaks his mind. He knows more than most every doctor about what's going on in the world concerning COVID-19. And he's been gracious enough to come on this show. So for those, welcome, Dr. Hodkinson. For those who've not heard about you, can you tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself than just the basic introduction I just gave you, which is phenomenal, but I'd like to know a little more about you.
Well, you covered the territory pretty well there. I'm not into beating my chest here. I'd just like to say that I've been around the block. I've been a leader in pathology in Canada. I've kept my nose clean for my entire career until the College of American Pathologists decided to can me because of speaking the truth. We could elaborate on that later on. I like to get only like to get involved in big stuff, Peter. 30 years ago, I took on Big Tobacco when we were trying to control their advertising and marketing strategies. COVID is the next big thing that I got involved in. Another big thing, all kinds of issues on the table. But I'm also, in addition to my bio, I'm CEO, interim CEO, and chairman of a biotech company in North Carolina that has an incredible technology that would prevent the fear-demic that we went through during COVID because of the ridiculous PCR-based tests that we could talk about later. So that's me in a nutshell. I'm to the right of Genghis Khan politically. I'm a Trumper. I wish he'd recant on COVID. He was the best president you've had in living memory. He was dead wrong on COVID, and we can get into that later on.
I agree with you on that. I said that at the time, which I don't want to get on a side, but that summer before his election, when COVID had dissipated pretty much, I said now was the time for him to get reelected, was to open the country back up and say, look, okay, we've got this thing on the run. It's time to open up all our businesses. If you still have a fear of COVID, if you're still unsure, you stay home. We're not going to keep others who are totally healthy and need to run their businesses to keep their livelihood. We need to open up the country. And he didn't do it. And I think that cost him the election just as much as the election fraud cost him the election. So, Doc, I thanks for being on the show. You've been very outspoken, along with many others internationally, I got to say, saying this experimental vaccine, and I use that in quotations, experimental vaccine should never have been released. Please inform my listeners, because that's very important.
It's very simple. It wasn't needed. It wasn't tested. It didn't work, and it's killing people. That should be enough to get it off the market immediately. There are stone cold facts out there. There's a lot that's arguable because the government doesn't want to study it anywhere internationally. but there are stone cold facts out there. Look at the excess mortality data. Look at Ed Dowd's incredible increase, documented increase in disability claims. Look at the reduction in live births. Excess mortality and reduction in live births are stone cold facts. Happen to be synchronous with the rollout of the vaccine. So until they can show otherwise, it was the vaccine, and the goddamn thing should be stopped everywhere now. In particular for pregnant women, the most precious asset we have. They're still advocating using this experimental poison in pregnant women. Does anyone remember the word thalidomide? Thalidomide. Get a grip on yourselves. I say that to anyone in authority listening. You are killing people. The whole thing was nothing worse than a bad seasonal flu. It could have been handled with common sense like we've handled previous flu epidemics. We didn't need you. If we were sick, we stayed at home. We didn't need exemption letters. We didn't need your involvement in anything. And your pathetic vaccine, totally experimental, wasn't needed and is now killing people in large numbers. The current estimates of global deaths directly attributable to this so-called vaccine is approximately 20 million. Vaccines are normally withdrawn from the market when they've killed 50 people. The discrepancy is staggering. It might have been acceptable if this was an Armageddon virus, but it's not. It's no worse than a bad seasonal flu. That's got to sink in.
Now, we've been saying that too for how many years now since it started. I can tell you our family, I was in Albany and they took a vote and they said they brought us into a room, our conference, and they said, we're going to take a vote in a few minutes to give Governor Cuomo executive power to be a dictator, literally. And if you don't, what they told us was, if you do not give him, this is in March of 2020, they said, if you do not vote to give him this dictatorial power, every death will be on you. Thousands of deaths from this and it'll be on you. And I stood up and said, I can do my job. I don't need to give this governor, this dictator already. I don't need to give him these emergency powers to line his pocket and to make stupid decisions, which he did, okay, for personal gain. I don't need to give him. I can do my job. Out of 150 people, Doc, only 6 of us voted against giving him those powers. And I was a tinfoil hat conspiracy. I tell people my tinfoil hat now looks like a halo for going against the junk that happened. And I can tell you by April, a month later after this all started, and they told us no family gatherings, our family said, screw it. Okay. We're having our Sunday dinners with 12, 14 people. A couple of my neighbors were freaked out when they saw the cars. And I was like, just turn your head because I'm not complying. I'm not wearing a mask. I'm not putting up with this. And, you mentioned the other doctors, or you mentioned the pregnant women. Mm-hmm. And I've got for children. Can you tell us why this is so dangerous to children? Because the U.S. government wants all children vaxxed and boosted, yet children are the least vulnerable to this, and that's been out there since it started. Why the push by governments to just totally decimate our children with this vaccine and boosters? What's your take on that?
Well, in the States, it was your teachers' unions that were behind the myth that this virus was so transmissible and lethal. Serious measures had to be taken. The teachers' unions, of course, are least interested in children's education. They're interested in the economics of teaching and the union power in elections. If that was one of the principal drivers forcing children to receive this experimental therapy, with all the catastrophic consequences. We're not just talking about the myocarditis and the premature deaths here. We're talking about, in particular, the terrible consequences of being forced to wear this diaper on your face for 5-8 hours a day, building up carbon dioxide above industrial standards, known to affect intellectual development at a time when the brain is still developing. It's not surprising that intellectual achievements have fallen back a grade or two over the last 3 years. That's something that will have lifetime consequences.
Yes.
Children have taken the brunt of the last 3 years' interventions. None of the mandates worked. None of the mandates could work, and therefore none of the mandates did work. We knew that masks were utterly useless. You can't stop a mosquito with a chain link fence.
I say that.
The 6-foot rule was dreamt up by Collins. We know that from a conversation he had with Dr. Paul Alexander.
That's correct.
Alexander asked Collins, why 6 feet? He said, I don't know. Why not? It sounds like a good number, doesn't it? Utterly useless. Utterly useless. We had idiocrats running the asylum. And
Doc,
the biggest one was Fauci. But let's just put things in context here for a minute, if I may, David. Fauci and Birx took the heat, but in my opinion, they were merely stooges for the, they're merely stooges for the DOD. It was a DOD operation. You would expect the DOD to have contingency plans for an Armageddon virus in case China did let a bioweapon loose intentionally. You would expect them to have a contingency plan. They were lusting to put it into place as a trial run. And an unexpected opportunity landed on their laps with the unintentional, accidental release of this gain-of-function virus that Fauci had funded from Wuhan. And so the DOD went into high gear, practicing a run. Unfortunately, as we know now, it got out of hand. It was toxic. It was deadly. But Fauci, the failed Lilliputian, the guy that had no fame in his career with a failed HIV vaccine, but controlling all the money, Fauci basically persuaded Trump to agree to a warp speed vaccination program. Mm-hmm. So you had a Lilliputian, a failed Lilliputian, with all the money pitching to a narcissist, and the conversation would have taken about 5 seconds. Trump would have agreed in a heartbeat because he was looking for fame too. And as I said earlier on, I'm a Trumper, for all kinds of reasons. But on COVID, he was absolutely dead wrong. He was lied to by his senior idiocrats, and the rest is history. I don't think, I am not a conspiracy theorist of any shape or shadow. I do not believe in genocide, 5G, graphene oxide, snake venom, etc., etc., etc. I believe in stone cold facts. That's what's going to take us through this awful period in human history. Once those facts start getting confirmed by the authorities, you see, the most terrible thing is that all these awful statistics are coming out, anecdotal, a lot of them, but it's so severe that they're not just culpable for what they have done without sufficient evidence. They're even more culpable for not studying it once they're told it's happening. And the biggest thing that I'm concerned about is not all the deaths that we've heard about, the strokes, the heart attacks, the neurologic injuries, and etc. Those are bad enough. But what's even worse than that is the possibility that the human race has been changed permanently because of what we call reverse transcription of RNA into DNA. It's supposed to be a one-way track, DNA to RNA to protein production to make your cells function. But it can go the other direction, and it's been shown to be a fact. MIT has shown that the mRNA in this clot shot is reverse transcribed into human DNA in a petri dish, in vitro, as we call it, in an experimental laboratory. That needs to be studied urgently in actual living people. to confirm that there is insertion into our DNA from this experimental vaccine, because that would be permanent, transgenerational, and depending upon where that insertion happens into our DNA, it could result in all kinds of medical consequences, not the least of which is the suppression of genes that keep cancer under control, or amplifying genes that are more likely to cause cancer. We're already seeing an explosion of cancer, turbo cancers, we're calling them, especially in young people, very aggressive, unusual cancers, again, not studied. They are so culpable at so many levels, given the scale of what they've introduced into society for absolutely no reason. I called it 3 years ago the biggest hoax ever perpetrated on an unsuspecting public.
Amen.
And when I said that, it was an understatement. These people should be tried and executed. It's the Nuremberg Code that was not followed. 7 physicians in Nazi Germany swung because of what they did then. This time around, substantially more people have been murdered by the actions of these idiocrats, and they should face the consequences.
Doc, that just brought me to the one I was going to ask you, because according to vaccinologist Geert van den Bosch, I don't know if you know that person.
Yes, I know him very well.
Yeah, he said continued mass COVID-19 vaccination is driving more infectious and potentially dangerous viral variants, increasing the risk of severe COVID-19, aggressive cancers, and autoimmune diseases in these populations. And
Right.
it says repeated COVID shots driving dangerous variants, turbo cancers, which you just mentioned. What is a turbo cancer, to tell our listeners? What is turbo cancer?
Just before we get into that, let me say one thing about RNA viruses. You can never, underlined in neon, never, ever get ahead of an RNA virus if you start vaccination in the middle of a pandemic. Medical dogma. It's impossible. What happens is you are encouraging the emergence of resistant versions or mutated versions of the virus. Medical dogma. They did it anyway.
They did it anyway.
Get ahead of an RNA virus. That's why the flu vaccine is utterly useless, because it's always for last year's virus. By the time you've got a vaccine, even at warp speed, by the time you've got a so-called vaccine against a new mutated version of an RNA virus, it's already changed. It's utterly useless. These boosters are ridiculous, a fantasy. They will never, ever work. All they do is encourage the emergence of yet more variants, and so on ad infinitum.
That's I was told that by a number of doctors about the flu vaccine, that the best, even some of their best years, the flu vaccine works maybe 10 to 20%, which I thought, if you're going to take that chance, that's a horrible percentage. But you're right, because it mutates, it becomes different the next year. So, and you're giving, for last year's variant, you're giving something which no longer exists. And it's follow the money. It's all about money for these drug companies. And they tell people, and I see so many people line up to get their flu shots, and I'll never take a flu shot. I never have, and I never will. It's like you said, it's sort of ridiculous. So, and then I won't get into that, but this MSNBC host, which you just touched on, which I just found, his name is Mehdi Hassan. He spent a segment of his show defending school lockdowns for COVID and he called it a dangerous myth of learning loss for our children from the COVID, from the whole thing. He didn't believe it was true. He thought it was a myth made up, that our children suffered during the lockdowns. And he defends school lockdowns and thinks they should happen again and again and again if there's any kind of COVID. I think this guy's a complete blithering idiot who doesn't know anything. What's your take on this gentleman?
Is he a physician?
No, he's a MSNBC host. He's a talk show host.
Okay, let's be generous. Let's just call them media prostitutes. The money's good, but the work is not that pleasant, right? Um, they're just lying. They're conforming because, of course, the mainstream media is bought and paid for. Look at all the ads that they run for drugs. You'd have thought when Congress passed the legislation that pharmaceutical companies must indicate in their advertisements all the side effects, which costs them an awful lot of money to run those ads, expanded ads with all the side effects. You would have thought that Big Pharma would be upset about it, wouldn't you? No, just the opposite. They were happier than a pig in mud because the more money they poured down the throats of the media, the more they could control the message. And that's exactly why the mainstream media is bought and paid for. You can't trust a damn thing that they say.
I agree with you, Doc. So one thing I want to do is there was a poll, this big national poll put out in the United States. And I know you're not a conspiracy theorist, so I'm just going to tell you some of these. I'm going to ask you some of these questions, sort of rapid fire on the polling data. These are some serious questions and perceptions that people have when they were asked these polling questions. And I want to get your opinion, fact or conspiracy theory, right? So let's start out. The first one is a third of adults polled believe COVID-19 vaccines caused thousands of sudden deaths in otherwise healthy people. Now, this only a third, about 33%, 66% said, no, they didn't. COVID vaccines didn't cause death or didn't cause any harm to people. What would you say, fact on that or conspiracy?
The 1/3 are perfectly correct. And the reason the 2/3 are ignorant is very simple. The authorities will not do full autopsies with a specialized staining under the microscope that reveals the true cause of death as directly due to the spike protein.
Wow. Okay. Next one is just over a third of the people. That's about 30. It was like 36%. A third, only a third believed ivermectin was and is an effective treatment for COVID-19. 2/3 of people believe that ivermectin doesn't help at all. Ivermectin help. Is that true or conspiracy theory?
Ivermectin has been shown overwhelmingly in meta-analyses to work, provided it's given early enough and in sufficient dosage. The people that do not believe that have simply been fire-hosed 24/7 by the opposite story from government that wants to support the vaccine narrative.
Yeah, and there's a doctor locally who's internationally gone out and, or not a doctor, an attorney who's tried to get people and to get ivermectin at these hospitals because the hospitals would not, no, under no circumstance, you couldn't even bring it in when they were on their deathbed. And a good friend of mine lost his 32-year-old son in Virginia, and the hospital refused. They had him on a ventilator eventually, and he died, but they refused to give him ivermectin, even though they knew he was going to die. They refused. It was horrible. But all right,
David, a comment here on ivermectin. The reality is that there were probably very, very few deaths directly and solely due to COVID-19. Those people could have been helped and potentially saved by ivermectin, which was a new application for that well-researched and safe drug. But people must keep their heads screwed on. All the people that have died during the last 3 years would not have been helped by ivermectin because, first of all, the death was due to other things that was already underway, heart disease, cancer, etc. True deaths due solely to COVID-19 were about the same number as would have happened in previous flu epidemics.
correct.
Every death is tragic. I don't agree with Stalin's famous statement, a single death is tragic and millions is merely a statistic. Every death is tragic. But we have to keep our heads screwed on. It wouldn't have made a huge difference had it been approved, which it should have been.
Right. Doc, Dr. Hodkinson, I was getting, as an state elected official, I was getting the updates during COVID every day of every single county, every new case. And then what I found out from a number of doctors here in New York State in different hospitals and even locally here in Buffalo area was because of the $13,000 for each diagnosis that was COVID, they would get $13,000.
Right.
And so what was happening was someone was getting diagnosed at a MAC center, and then they were transferred to the hospital. They were getting diagnosed again at the hospital. That was 2. They got moved to the 3rd floor. That was 3. Many of these patients were getting diagnosed 3 to 5 times. That's 5 times 13,000. So it wasn't just one person per case. They were lying to everyone in New York State when they were saying, oh, these cases are blowing up. We had 42 cases today. And the one day I looked into this, I talked to a couple doctors in the county. The 42 cases was actually 11. Okay. But they blew it up to 42 and make it sound like this whole COVID was just blowing. Everybody was getting COVID when the truth was, it was not. It was all about the money. So I just want to get that out there because I dealt with this. If you remember, down in Tampa, Florida, when this happened, a gentleman was on a motorcycle and went off the road, had an accident, hit a telephone pole or something and died. The hospital labeled it COVID. And the Tampa Tribune paper, I still have the articles, went to the hospital every day for almost, 68 days straight and saying, when are you going to change this from a COVID death to a traffic accident? And they wouldn't do it. It finally took so much pressure from the newspaper getting out in the public that they finally changed it after more than 2 months. They actually changed one case to say, yeah, it was a traffic accident. But they were doing this all over the country and all over, Doc. It was all about the money. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. All the institutions, not just medicine, and the subcategories of medicine, hospitals, the medical associations, the journals, totally corrupt. Government, obviously corrupt. The alphabet agencies, obviously corrupt. All the people running the show there are lusting for is to pirouette out into a board seat as a director of a big pharma company. They want to please their masters. 50% of their income comes from big pharma. You don't bite the hand that feeds you. Everyone was culpable. The media, the church. Where was the church in all of this? I'll tell you where they were. They were peeing behind their pulpits. Instead of leading their flocks at a time of catastrophe and terrible decisions at the breakfast table, they were hiding. Just like physicians were putting their pocketbooks before their patients. We went into medicine years ago to serve humanity. Listen, I'm not some liberal bleeding heart. My politics are very right wing. But we went into medicine when I was a medical student to serve humanity. We got up at 3 o'clock in the morning to clean out a belly full of shit. We did house calls. We didn't distinguish between a CEO and an addict when they walked into the emergency room. That's all changed now. It's all about the money. It's all about the money. The doctor looking in the eyes of a pregnant woman and telling her that this stuff is safe is putting his income ahead of a baby's future. That is one of the most despicable moments that you could think of in the history of medicine. It's totally changed. And so I summarize that by saying, government is now your new doctor. Be afraid, be very afraid. And that's today, mind you. It's going to get even worse because GPs are expensive and they're going to be replaced by artificial intelligence. You won't see a doctor when you go to see your GP next time, not next time, but in the near future. You'll be speaking into a computer.
No, Doc, I get it with my, I keep seeing my physician assistant. I don't think I know my doctor actually.
Right.
but I want to get back to real quick on that church thing, because I actually led a group and spoke after about 2 months of COVID. About 75 pastors from around New York State got together right up here on a Sunday and had a rally and said, we're not going to shut down anymore. And they went against the governor's order, and they said, we're going to open up. And if you want to arrest us, come right out and get us. And I applauded them, but it was the hundreds and thousands in New York State that masked, closed their doors, and did not open up for their people. That really was discouraging.
I had a religious upbringing. I'm currently an agnostic, but I consider religious freedom to be the most important freedom there is. It's terribly important that our children be taught the ethics and morals that are in the scriptures, even if they reject it later. Those so-called leaders of the church should be so ashamed of themselves, leaving their parishioners alone at a time of terrible, terrible stress.
God bless you. I 100%. So I agree. Let's go back. A third, about 40% in this poll believe the COVID-19 booster shots are effective against the new variants. Truth or conspiracy for those 40% that believe the
who gives a damn? It's pointless passing this argument. The clot shots should stop immediately. They weren't needed, they weren't tested, they don't work, and they're killing people. I repeat that mantra. They weren't needed, they weren't tested. They're killing people. It's so obvious. It's screamingly obvious. It should stop immediately, particularly for pregnant women and children. But for everyone, there's no excuse to give it to anyone, not even granny in the nursing home with terminal heart failure. No one gets it, because guess what? If you let it slip by this time, they'll use the same excuses to fast track something next time. It was not tested. A brand new technology was not tested. It's normally tested for 10 years.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I blame that on Trump. Unfortunately, I believe that he got, like you said, he got bought into a pack of lies, and his narcissism. Again, I'm like you. I support him, and I always have. I got a huge track record of that. But I think that caused this whole world a problem that we're not going to get out of for a long time.
I don't think you need to look any further than these three processes that were operational simultaneously to understand what happened. The three processes were these: stupendous stupidity by the idiocrats, gigantium greed by big pharma, and Machiavellian manipulation by politicians. Operate those three 24/7 for 3 years, and people just hear that and nothing else. And so they're not stupid. It's all they've heard. And they used to believe in government, and that was the belief factor that was exploited.
Well, Doc, the folks were talking to Dr. Rodger Hodkinson, who's foremost one of the leaders in the entire world on this COVID issue. A couple quick more questions. I want your take on just a couple more things, Doc. I appreciate you staying on. Where President Biden just came out, which I have nothing good to say about this guy. He's, he's mentally shot. There's just nothing there. What an empty suit. But he wants to fund a new COVID vaccine for everybody, whether they've gotten it before or not. I mean, he's the Democrats in this country and leftists and communists are tripling down on this stupid vaccine. He not only wants it for everybody. Now there's a story that says that, again, he wants to try to mandate it, a new COVID vaccine for everybody. And that's whether you've gotten it or not. I know it's crazy, but what's your take?
There's something missing up here. Um, utterly ridiculous. I mean, we've covered all those issues already.
Mhm.
It's been tried and failed, God knows how many times in the last 3 years. Why would the next one work? I mean, one's a problem, two's a trend, three, you're bloody stupid.
But it's the money, Doc. Dr. Hodkinson, it's the money. It's huge money for a lot of people, and they're
Right.
going to promulgate it. And I believe that most of these doctors, and I've talked to my own doctor on the side personally, most of these doctors are threatened. Okay,
Yeah.
they're literally threatened to go along to get along, or they're taken out. There's things that happen to them that you can't afford to lose your license, like in New York State, if you don't go along with the mantra and you don't go along with state health.
But the response now from these organizations, the licensing bodies and government, CDC, FDA, is, oh, you misunderstood. We didn't say you must not. We're not prohibiting. It was just a recommendation, you see. What absolute bullshit. What mealy-mouthed wiggling off the hook.
New York State's the same. That they put out recommendations, the CDC, and every school district immediately took them in as a law when it were just a recommendation. But that's because they're told there's a quid pro quo. If you don't take along these recommendations, they're going to come after you. And and I saw that happen at a local school here 2 years ago.
The legal argument really revolves around reasonable choice. There was not any reasonable choice, even if they were now saying it was just a recommendation. At the time, it was clearly something that had a binary decision. You're either going to take it or you're going to lose your job. It was not a reasonable choice that people had at all. And that is a legal standard that has failed. But before we run out of time, I did want to say one unrelated comment about, you asked about turbo cancers before, David. And it's very important that people realize how the immune system functions. You live until 85 plus or minus because your immune system does two jobs miraculously, silently, 24/7. It doesn't just knock off bugs that are invading your body, which you think is the primary cause, but it has an even bigger, more important function. Because of all the cell divisions that happen billions of times every day in your skin, in your bowel, in your bone marrow, those mutations are not perfect. We are mutating our DNA all the time in those cell divisions. And we are creating very small cancers that the immune system gets rid of because it sees it sees these small cancers as something foreign, something not you, just like a bug is not you. One of the principal functions of the immune system is to surveil every nook and cranny of your body for 85 years for these very small cancers and knock them off. Now, with this experimental genetic therapy, we know conclusively that the immune system has been suppressed for a significant period of time. So it should come as no surprise that that is one of the many mechanisms by which we believe cancer counts are exploding, because the immune system is no longer effectively monitoring for cancer.
Wow. Doc. Folks, this is a must listen to and a must watch. I can't thank you enough, Dr. Rodger Hodkinson, for being on the show. I think you've really just laid it out there. If people have any questions whatsoever, I think you answered them, and I really appreciate you. We went a little long, but boy, was it worth it. So I want to thank you having you on, Doc. It was tremendous. God bless you. Stay strong. Please keep fighting for us, because we need more voices like yours that tell the truth. Okay, because we've been inundated with lies and deception, and it's causing people their lives And,
Right.
and we're talking thousands, 100,000s, millions of people. And the masses need to wake up to what's really happening here. Our government is corrupt. And now the talk of new lockdowns and school closings and mask mandates is ridiculous. And I tell people, Doc, just so you know, I tell people we're not going to comply this time. We are going to fight fire with fire. We're going right after them. If a business says, well, you can't come in without a mask, we're not only going to not go to that business, we're going to put it on all social media. We're going to blow it out and tell people, do not. We're going to boycott this. We're going to go after the teachers, the school superintendents, the schools, the politicians. We're going after everybody if they try to pull this again, because it's all corrupt. It's all about lockdown. It's all about votes. It's all about power and money. And gosh, Doc, Dr. Rodger Hodkinson, people, follow him. This is the man who tells you the truth. This is a man who just tells it like it is. And I pray for your safety, Doctor. And God bless you. Thank you for being on the show. You ever need anything from me, you let us know. And thanks for being on the show.
It's been my pleasure. I'd love to come back. Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you, Doctor. Take care. Folks, we're going to wrap it up. That was probably the most informative interview I've ever seen. And I wish millions and millions of people could watch this, especially the ones that still have doubts or that just lap up what the media and the leftists tell them. So thank you again for being here with me. Please share this. It's Truth in Politics. And boy, did you hear the truth today. God is still on the throne, folks. And God bless all of you and stay safe.
You have been watching Truth in Politics with New York Assemblyman David DiPietro. Search for DiPietro for you and tune in every week on Facebook, Rumble, Twitter, YouTube, and many other internet platforms, including the Big Whack Radio Internet Podcast. Thank you for listening.